Welcome to Disrupting Peace, a show about why peace hasn't worked and how it still could. I'm Bridget Conley, Research Director at the World Peace Foundation. In each episode, I speak with a scholar specializing in one obstacle to peace and an activist who's changing systems from the ground up. Together, we'll explore what worked, what didn't, and why we shouldn't give up. Each episode ends with collective dreaming about what it would take to create the world we hope for, or at least to get a whole lot closer. Now, people who focus on weapons trade divide the work into three broad categories. First, small arms. Second, conventional weapons, like missiles and fighter jets. And third, nuclear weapons. Put away your imitations of a T-Rex, because we're saving small arms for a later discussion. In this episode, we're talking about big weapons, bombs and the weapons systems that convey them. Today, I'm joined by two of the leading activists and researchers on nuclear and conventional weapons, respectively. Ray Acheson is a writer and organizer against war, militarism, and the arms trade, and in support of the abolition of the carceral system and other structures of state violence. They're the director of Reaching Critical Will, the disarmament program of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, which is the world's oldest feminist peace organization. And they also served on the steering group of the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, which won the 2017 Nobel Peace Prize. Bill Hartung is a senior research fellow with the Quincy Institute and a leading researcher and activist on U.S. major conventional weapons systems. He literally wrote the book on Lockheed Martin, which is the top defense company in the world. He's analyzed decades of U.S. arms sales policies and regularly offers expert insights to major U.S. news outlets. In this conversation, we're going to dive deep into the military-industrial complex and explore what it will take to rein in both nuclear and conventional weapons on a global scale. Ray, Bill, welcome to Disrupting Peace.
Glad to be here.
Thanks for having us.
So I'm going to start with a game. President Dwight Eisenhower was commanding general of U.S. forces in Europe during World War II, president of Columbia University, and president of the United States from 1953 to 61. In his final speech as president, this is January 17th, 1961, he also coined the term the military-industrial complex and warned against it. Obviously, the two of you know this story, but I wanted you to fill in the blanks on other parts of his famous speech. So give me your best answer, what you wish Eisenhower had said to fill in the missing words and the below sentences. Okay, Ray, here's yours. Quote, America's leadership and prestige depend not merely upon our unmatched material progress, riches, and military strength, but also on how we use our power in the interest of blank and blank.
All right. I wish he had said, in the pursuit of peace, disarmament, and demilitarization. The United States, unfortunately, before and since Eisenhower, has led global militarization, and it would have been much better for the entire planet had things gone in an opposite direction in that era after World War II.
Yeah, what he actually said was world peace and human betterment, which is not a far cry from what you asked for. Bill, all right, here's the second one. The Free University, historically the fountainhead of free ideas and scientific discovery, has experienced a revolution in the conduct of research. Partly because of the huge cost involved, a governmental contract becomes virtually a substitute for intellectual curiosity. For every old blackboard, there are now hundreds of blank.
Computers, eggheads.
The actual answer is new electronic computers. All right, game over. We'll now turn to Eisenhower's 1961 warning about the rise of a military-industrial complex. Now, for people who aren't familiar, the military-industrial complex refers to the relationship between government, the military, Congress, and president, and private industry that builds weapons. And it really conveys the idea that policymaking and profit-making are interwoven in dangerous ways. Are there any examples from today that you think crystallize what the military-industrial complex is in our lifetime?
Probably the biggest poster child for dysfunctional kind of pork barrel-driven procurement is the F-35 combat aircraft.
Right. That's the aircraft Lockheed Martin was contracted to produce in 2001. It was supposed to answer the needs of the Navy, Army, Marines, and Air Force in everything fighter jet, but it's been plagued by delays, safety failures, and cost increases. Current estimates are that the fleet of F-35s will, over their lifetime, cost $2 trillion. That's more than the entire country's student debt.
Yeah. And so, the companies, if they can get a foothold early, they can often keep these things going for decades. And they usually make as much money maintaining them as they do building them.
One thing I wanted to hear from both of you, so there's, the common argument that people make is nuclear deterrence. If we have this huge arsenal, then that in fact contributes to peacemaking because people are afraid to take us on, right? So that the world is ruled more by overwhelming capacity and threat and fear, and that's what drives peace. It's hard for me to make that argument without sounding a little sarcastic, but I'd love to hear both of you because you've certainly heard it from people in responding to your work. So, Ray, how do you respond to that one?
Yeah, I think, the problem with nuclear deterrence theory and trying to maintain it with a straight face is really asking people to look at the world today and ask if this is a world of peace, right? And so this is not a world of peace. This is not a world in which people are living with human betterment, as the phrase that Eisenhower used, right? This is a world of extreme violence. This idea that we need to invest in something that can eliminate the entire planet, these weapons of mass destruction, in order to maintain peace. It's just like a security racket that you would find with the mafia. And it's the military contractors that are the mafia in this place. It is the governments that maintain this illusion of security through violence and peace through dominance. And it just does not play out in the lived experience of the vast majority of people on the planet. And if you look also at what's been required to maintain nuclear weapons, including the mining of uranium, to the storing of nuclear waste, the testing of nuclear weapons. All of this has happened primarily on the lands of indigenous peoples around the world. We know all of the real lived experiences of people around the world, but these perspectives aren't really allowed in the corridors of power in DC and Moscow and London, in these places where people are making decisions about how to spend their country's money and how to secure their own privileged sense of power in the world instead of peace and well-being for everybody.
Bill, what about that argument about security, though?
The idea of deterrence is sort of like, I have enough nukes, the other side's not going to mess with me. But then part of that is, they have to believe we'll use our weapons to be deterred. And so you get more and more close to the brink. And also, it implies rational actors. If a particular regime was back to the wall, the leader thought their life and power were at risk, they could well use nuclear weapons, even though the devastation would affect their own country. Even within deterrence theory, there's arguments that a few hundred weapons would be sufficient. But as long as that's the concept, the possibility of buildup, of going to the brink, is there. And to a large degree, I think it's been a good amount of luck that we haven't had another nuclear confrontation of some sort. And the more countries that have them, the more possibility that they're going to be used.
Right. So now I'd like to talk about a concrete example of long-term, committed organizing making a tangible impact on nuclear weapons. Ray, you served on the steering group of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons for 16 years. From 2008 to 2024. This campaign led to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which was adopted at the UN in 2017 and won the Nobel Peace Prize that same year. Can you describe what this treaty is and the strategy behind it?
The treaty categorically prohibits all nuclear weapon activities, so possession, use, development, testing, sharing, and storage. It also sets out the provisions for nuclear armed states to join the treaty and eliminate their nuclear weapon programs. And it also includes some really innovative provisions around environmental remediation and victim assistance for the past harm of nuclear weapon use and testing. So it's quite a comprehensive treaty. The nuclear armed states have not yet joined it, which we anticipated in the process of developing it. We knew they would not join right away. We knew they would apply pressure against the countries that were negotiating this treaty. And the intention wasn't to have them join right away. It was instead to really change the landscape around the bomb and to create a tool to pressure economic divestment from nuclear weapon producing companies and political pressure on the countries possessing these weapons, and to put nuclear weapons on the same legal footing as other weapons of mass destruction like chemical weapons and biological weapons.
Can I ask you a question? So,
yeah,
for people who don't know, like, okay, let's say your to-do list on your desk, your job is to start an international coalition of civil society organizations, right? Which is something that people in the field, we say those words all the time. But what does that look like day one?
The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, it took a few years of build-up through a series of conferences, many regional meetings, local meetings with governments to build up real cross-regional force to drive this through at the United Nations. So it took many, many years to build these types of relationships with the governments, a sense of trust between activists and diplomats as well, that we were all part of this same project, that we would be working together and helping each other, so that when the pressure would come from the nuclear armed states, which would be inevitable, that they would have regional support, that they would have support from the NGOs, and that they wouldn't just be left on their own to face the economic and political pressure that would undoubtedly be applied.
So none of the nuclear power states have signed the treaty. And so this idea, I think, that people have that you build this great effort and it ends with a treaty, and that's success, and wrap it up with a bow, and knowing that those countries that have nuclear weapons haven't signed. What was more important to you, the treaty or the process of engaging a global conversation around banning nuclear?
Both were absolutely vital to this effort. This was a tool in that longer process of the elimination of nuclear weapon programs globally. And the treaty is a piece of that, but an important piece. One of the biggest shifts, I would say, that we're already seeing is divestment from nuclear weapon producing companies. And so we've been able to use the treaty to approach financial institutions, banks, pension funds, to say nuclear weapons are illegal under international law. So you need to divest your portfolios from them, and especially any institution that has an ethical divestment platform. They've agreed, and they've done that the same way that they've done with cluster munitions or with landmines, and that many are now doing on the fossil fuel industry as well. And so the treaty has been essential to that, to removing billions of dollars already from the nuclear weapon industry. Now, of course, we have a long way to go. You know, we're at the highest risk of use of nuclear weapons right now that we've seen since the Cold War. And so this treaty does not pretend that everything is fine in the world and, as you say, wrapped up with a bow. But it is a really instrumental tool in and of itself on this longer pathway to the elimination of nuclear weapons.
So, Bill, on the conventional weapons side, there's the Arms Trade Treaty. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is?
The Arms Trade Treaty is a global agreement to try to rein in the sales of conventional arms, which came together in 2013. It sets certain standards, tries to get countries to track these things better, but it has no enforcement mechanism. So it's kind of like a statement of where we'd like to be, but a lot more work would need to be done before it would have the kind of impact we'd like to see.
And Bill, is the U.S., has it signed on to the treaty?
The U.S. has not signed on, partly for kind of strategic reasons. They want to use arms sales as a tool, but also even, like the National Rifle Association has been a big opponent and has put effort into blocking it, and actually helped create the block in the Senate that makes it impossible to get it ratified.
So what about U.S. national controls of the arms trade? People say that the U.S. has one of the strongest control mechanisms and oversights for who we sell weapons to. Bill, are there any cases of the U.S. halting sales to a country because of human rights abuses or atrocities?
There have been some moments where military aid has been cut off to certain countries, but often it doesn't last long enough. In terms of sales, where the other country is paying money, Congress has never successfully voted down an arms sale. They did get majorities for blocking a sale to Saudi Arabia under Trump, but Trump vetoed that. On paper, there's a lot to be said for the U.S. system. Arms aren't supposed to go to countries involved in systematic human rights abuses, countries that are blocking humanitarian aid. There's all kinds of things on paper that either are subject to a presidential exemption or simply are not enforced. And I think Israel is obviously the most horrific example of the moment. Any standard, international law, U.S. law, none of this should be happening. And yet Israel is arguing that they're following the law. The Biden administration is not holding them to account.
But I just wanted to highlight. So for now, the record is Congress got the votes once to block a sale to Saudi Arabia and otherwise has never blocked a sale.
Right. I mean, they can pass legislation to cut off a whole country or cut military aid, but for the vast majority of sales that they hear about, they have not successfully stopped one.
Okay, yeah. Ray, do you think there are any lessons from the movement to ban nuclear weapons that apply to conventional systems? Well, for example, compare the Arms Trade Treaty and the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons.
The Arms Trade Treaty presumes that the arms industry will continue, right? Mm-hmm. It doesn't limit the production of weapons. It doesn't limit profit-making possibilities from the production and sale of weapons. It only constrains the transfer of certain weapons in certain circumstances. I think that that key difference is that the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons is about outlining nuclear weapons as a whole. You know, it's a categorical prohibition on all nuclear weapon-related activities and programs. And that's the critical difference that I think future treaty making in the conventional arms area is going to have to take into account. How do we actually get not just to the arms sales, but how do we get to the arms production? How do we get to this question of corporations, CEOs, and shareholders being able to make a killing off of making a killing in the world? Because that's the crux of the issue, I think, when it comes to conventional weapons, is that this is one of the most profitable industries in the world. And there's very little oversight. There's massive cost overruns, as Bill was outlining. And it's just a way for corporations to make a lot of money. And they make more money if there's more killing and more war.
So Eisenhower's speech, the famous military-industrial complex speech, was given over 60 years ago. And so if we were to think 60 years into the future, so say it's year 2084, imagine we've achieved world peace. Paint me a picture. What changed in the realm of controlling weapons that helped us get here?
I think we'd have to transform the global economy to some degree, find other ways for people to make a living. I think also in the United States, we need a much stronger peace movement so we can force our government to sign on to some of these meaningful global efforts. I think if we uplift the times that we have made a difference in the past as a global community, I think the possibilities of building movements that can lead us to a world of peace will be that much greater. I mean, when Reagan reduced his enthusiasm for nuclear weapons, almost agreed to abolition with Gorbachev, that wasn't just him doing that. It was a global disarmament movement. But the powers that be are never going to admit that. So we have to claim our own history and kind of trumpet it for people to understand that we have made a difference in the past. I think a lot of people don't realize that citizen action has won huge victories.
Thank you. Ray, how'd we get here?
Yeah, I agree with Bill, of course, that we need transformation in economic structures. And I also agree with him that we need a stronger peace movement. And I really see the importance of connections between movements towards this end. And I think we are seeing a lot of this. And so I'm extremely hopeful. What's interesting to me right now in this resurging anti-war movement in the context of Israel's genocide of Palestinians is that it's really happening outside of the traditional, say, arms control and disarmament movement. It's really other activists and organizers that are taking a broader aim at the military-industrial complex and that are connecting this in their own work to the abolition of police and to borders. Students that were setting up the encampments at the universities that have investments in weapon companies, they're both demanding the disclosure and divestment from entities that are profiting from Israel's genocide, and they're also taking action in the same encampments against police violence and the police brutality and repression that we've seen. So I'm really looking here at the solidarity between these organizers and their short-term goals and the long-term potential for this kind of movement building. And I think that that's where I'm going to be putting my energy. And I hope a lot of other folks are keen to get involved in this work in the long-term struggle as well.
Ray, Bill, thank you again for joining me for this conversation.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.
With this interview, we took on huge issues related to controlling nuclear and conventional weapons. Both Ray and Bill were really clear that the tools currently in place are not fit to the task. I think they also crystallized a key challenge for activists. If you craft a treaty or national law without major players, can it make an impact? On the other hand, if these powerful actors play a crucial role in deciding how regulation looks, they often make agreements toothless and sometimes still don't even sign them, like the US with the Arms Trade Treaty. I'm thinking about Ray's question, are we living in a peaceful world? It makes me wonder if compromising with powerful actors did not produce the peaceful world we dreamed of. So we might as well make stronger demands. Even if they fail, at least we've done more to challenge the conversation about what is possible. Thanks for listening to episode 2 of Disrupting Peace. I'm Bridget Conley. You can find out more about Ray at rayacheson.com, and you can stay on top of Bill's work through the Quincy Institute at quincyinst.org. That's Quincy, INST.org. Disrupting Peace is a production of the World Peace Foundation. The show's produced by myself and Emily Shaw. Recording assistance by Jacob Winnick, with mixing by Asia Simpson and Jacob Winnick as well. Marketing and social media by Kelsey Henquinet. Show artwork by Simon Fung. Special thanks to Jeremy Helton, my colleagues, Lisa Avery, B. Arneson, and Alex Duvall, and the team from the Tufts Digital Design Studio, including Kimberly Lynn Ferrero-Arnias and Miles Donovan. Find out more about the World Peace Foundation at worldpeacefoundation.org. And follow us on X at World Peace FDTN, all one word. That's World Peace FDTN. Next week on Disrupting Peace, we're exploring how AI and autonomous weapons are being used today, specifically in places like Ukraine and Gaza, why researchers and activists are concerned, and how we can regain hope.
The reports coming out from Gaza tells us that the system would recommend targets, which would then give a human user, the commander, around 20 seconds to approve. And sometimes the question would just be whether that suggested target was male or not.
Until next time, stay skeptical and hopeful.